Okay, good evening everyone. Welcome to our Saturday Dhamma. Today we are going to look at something called the Gaṇakamoggalla Sutta. There was a person called the Gaṇakamoggalla, so that's how the sutta got its name. It's typical of Buddhist scriptures and Buddhist culture really to not put too much emphasis on naming things. Suttas don't have to have flowery or inspiring names. Inspiration can be useful, but it can also be misleading. Sometimes we become attached to names. It's always interesting when you name a new monk, the reactions. Sometimes the monk reacts and becomes very proud, or maybe doesn't like their new name. I once had the case where the lay community reacted quite violently to the naming of a monk. Named a monk after a very famous arahant, Moggaraja. Very famous in the time of the Buddha. Anyway, it caused quite a kerfuffle because people didn't understand where the name came from. So this sutta is called Gaṇakamoggalla Sutta, but we're not going to worry too much about the sutta. What we're most interested in is the Dhamma in it. But Gaṇakamoggalla gets mentioned because he asks a good question. Gaṇakamoggalla was a Brahmin, which means he would have been a priest of some sort, or someone involved with the practice of performing important rituals that were thought to be important, and having spiritual learning and understanding of the order of society and so on as accords with the Brahmanic religion. But it wasn't really a religion. You could say that it was they had codes, but it wasn't a religion in the sense that they tried to separate themselves from all other teachers. It was just religious in a way. They were religious people. Because they would come to people like the Buddha and ask them questions, it seems. Now maybe not all of them, but he was interested in the Buddha's teaching. And he considered, I think they would consider the Buddha well, it's not going to work. Hello. Sorry about that. We're still live? Okay. Anyway, enough about Brahmins. He asks a question of the Buddha. He says, if you look at this building, so the Buddha was staying in a place called Pubarama. Puba means in the east, or it means well, I guess it means east. It was in the east of Savatthi, and it was paid for by Visakha, who was very famous lay disciple of the Buddha. Anyway, that's where they were staying, and so she made this big building for the Buddha to live in, and so Gaṇakamoggalla points to the building that they're sitting in, and he says, "You look at this building, and you can see a gradual process involved." Actually, he says about the stairs, I'm not quite sure, but there seems to be a bit of interpreting here, but he looks at the staircase and he says, you look down to the last step of the staircase and there's a progression there. Right? So he starts the conversation off talking about progressions. Now the commentary says it actually refers to the building of the building. As you build it, you have to first lay down the foundation and then this and this. So you can look at a building and you can say, wow, there were steps involved with building this building. And then he says, among Brahmins like me, we have a gradual process of becoming a Brahmin, or of progressing as a Brahmin. There's study. First you study the Vedas, and then you study the commentaries on the Vedas, and they have all these texts that you would have to study, and then you'd have to learn how to debate and how to explain and so on. And he says, or archers. You look at archers, and they have to train. First they put the target close, and then farther and farther, and then they have moving targets and so on. He says with accountants, there's also training involved, many years of training to become an accountant. Make him count, take the apprentice and make him count 1, 1, 2, 2s, 3, 3s, 4, 4s, 5, 5s, and so on. And he says, now is it possible to describe in Gautama is the name of the Buddha, in Gautama's sasana, his Dhamma and discipline, is it possible to describe a gradual process? So this sutta actually I think is quite useful. It's not unique. There are many examples of very similar treatment, and there shouldn't be a lot to surprise someone who's read a lot of the Buddha's teaching if they read this text, but it's exemplary of this description of the path. A lot of these you'll notice are about path, a description of the path, and I think the one last week was about the path, but in a different way. So here we're talking about the gradual process of becoming a meditator and of becoming proficient in meditation. From the very beginning, when someone comes to you, what's the gradual process of becoming, you might say in some ways becoming Buddhist, in the sense of being someone who actually follows the Buddhist teaching instead of just says, I'm Buddhist and I believe in Buddhism and so on. And so it's a simple formulation, but I think it's useful to know, and so we won't skip this sutta, we'll talk about this. And so the Buddha describes steps. He describes steps in the Dhamma, and they're particularly appropriate for monks. They're directed towards a monastic community. But you can easily apply them if you adapt them, and what I'd like to do here is talk about ways that they can be generalized for really anyone who's interested in Buddhism. I think another thing this description does is it helps to provide a picture, sort of a sense of the bigger picture and the process involved in Buddhism for a newcomer. Because there are teachings in different traditions and paths and religions that often talk about states to be realized, but may not have a gradual path to lead there, step-by-step teachings. I mean, I would say even in Buddhism, there are some teachers who describe states, but aren't able to describe a gradual process by which to get there. Maybe they themselves got somewhere but aren't quite clear how to get there. So it's important to have this gradual path. On the other hand, there are teachings in different religions, even in Buddhism, that are, rather than having a gradual process, they describe a first step. They give preliminaries, or they give basic teachings. Right? Like there's a lot of Buddhists who are caught up in practicing metta, which is great, but when that becomes your primary practice, you're not really going to get very far. Well, you're not going to get to Nibbana through that. You're not going to become free from suffering. Or even more, a lot of Buddhists will just, and Buddhist teachers will just teach people to take the refuge in the Buddha, to practice good deeds, charity, and so on, to keep the 5 precepts, and that's it. And they teach that again and again and again, and it doesn't lead anywhere, because that's just the first step. So here we have steps, and it's important to remember them, to pay close attention, and to actually put them into practice, so that step by step we can reach the goal. So the first step the Buddha describes, of course, is precepts, keeping rules. I'd say living a disciplined life, having guidelines for your life. Having rules, I think, is probably a good way to describe it. Having rules is interesting. We were talking about evil in class this week, in my religious studies class, and it was an interesting debate about good and evil, because evil is a license. Studying Simone Weil, if anyone knows her, probably not, but French philosopher. And she says evil is a license. And it was interesting, because evil is therefore limitless. Evil doesn't put any limits on your behavior. Good is rather, in some sense, confined. Good is, in a way, restrictive, and that's why people aren't keen on it. Because if you don't have rules, you can do anything, you can go anywhere, and that's how the world lives, right? For the most part, our rules are vague and unclear, and so you easily have people become murderers and thieves and so on. Excited about evil in many cases because they don't have a clear sense of the usefulness of rules. Rules provide, you could say they provide a direction. If we're talking about a path and we're going somewhere, then you need a road, let's say. And don't go off the road, because if you go off the road, you'll get lost, you get stuck, you might even start going the wrong way. So for monks, there are many, many rules, but for lay people, I mean, the idea is just to have a sense of, this is right to do, this I will do, this I will not do. I won't kill, I won't steal, I won't lie, I won't cheat. These are my rules. I won't take drugs or alcohol. Last one's are really important, especially in modern times when it's become quite accepted and often expected that people drink alcohol or take drugs in certain circles, in certain societies. And so it can be quite a very powerful determination to say to yourself, I will no longer, as a rule, I will not take drugs or alcohol. And these are things that keep us pointed in the right direction, because if you engage in all of these, of course, you'll get pointed in the wrong direction quite easily. You don't have a rule against killing. Anytime you engage in killing, it's leading you in the wrong direction. It's leading your mind towards corruption and deterioration, and so on. So it's always the first step. Before you're even going to talk about meditation, you really should be clear about your direction and therefore the rules that you're going to live by. least the 5 precepts. For someone who's really serious, you would want to keep the 8 precepts. So not eating too much, not engaging in entertainment, and only sleeping 6 hours or less, sleeping on the floor, that kind of thing. So that's the first one. The second one, he says, so when they've accomplished that, once a person is moral and ethical, then we teach them to guard their senses. Second step. Once you're settled in what's right and what's wrong, this is do this, don't do that, then you start to, really it's the next step in terms of action, in terms of our relationship with the world, is the senses. Because once you've stopped doing outward bad deeds, stop killing, stealing, lying, cheating, even engaging in slight wrong deeds, you guard the senses to keep from the arising of the emotions and the desires and aversions that would again lead you to do or say things that you'd regret, that would cause you suffering or cause other people suffering. And so guarding the senses really it's very central to our practice as Buddhists, and especially as Buddhist meditators. A big part of the first steps in the meditation course, where we teach the meditator to be mindful when you see anything, say to yourself, seeing. When you hear, say hearing. This is guarding the senses. Guarding your mind from getting caught up in what you see. Don't just look at it and process all these things and get caught up in emotions, likes and dislikes. Seeing. When you see, remind yourself, that's just seeing. When you hear, that's hearing. When you smell, smelling. Taste, tasting. Feel, feeling. Buddha put a lot of emphasis on the senses. Dikte diktamatang bhavisati. Let seeing just be seeing. Let what is seen just be what is seen. Nothing more. Not this, not that, not me, not mine, not good, not bad. Just seeing. Of course, there are other aspects of guarding your senses. When you walk, not looking around everywhere and trying to see everything. When you walk, keeping your mind on your feet when you walk and so on. That's guarding the eyes. Guarding the ears means, well, maybe don't turn on music or go to places where there's sounds that can distract you, but etc. But most important and much more important, much more to be emphasized, is being mindful, guarding with mindfulness. Because you can't always control sounds, you can't, of course, control sight. You can't close these doors, even though you might run away from all the good and bad things that you might see and hear and so on. You can't run away from them. And so ultimately you have to be mindful of whatever you experience, hearing, seeing. So that's the second step. The third step, he says, is being moderate in eating, which I always was surprised at, because it seems like to single out eating, why is that so important to single out when there's many other things? We have many other activities, but when you boil it down, really we don't. We live our lives. Eating is really, it's really quite significant. It's the only thing that if you don't do, it's one of the few things that if you don't do it, you're going to die. Eating, drinking, and breathing, I think there's not much else. But eating is particular because, we have a strong and long relationship with food that is quite caught up in likes and dislikes. And not even just the likes and dislikes of the flavor, but the fear of not getting enough food. If you've ever gone hungry and just felt the horror of the fact that today I'm not going to be able to eat because I don't have any money for food or that sort of thing, or because I'm a Buddhist monk and I didn't get alms food today, that sort of thing. If you've ever been through that, you realize how attached we are to food. And also what a relief it is to let go. There was this book, George Orwell, I think, Down and Out in Paris and London. He got very poor. He managed to accidentally become impoverished, and he realized how liberating it is to be poor, because you no longer have to worry about falling. There's nothing for you to guard. When you've reached the bottom, you can't go any lower, he said. So moderation in food is important to help us deal with this very basic addiction and obsession with food. I mean, there are other addictions and obsessions that are also useful, but useful to look at, of course. But food is the only one that we can't do without. You can avoid many other addictions, music, sex, those kinds of things, but food you still have to live with, so definitely bears important mention. The other thing is, if you eat too much, it's very hard to meditate. You get lazy. So monks only eat in the morning. Meditators as well, our meditators here are only eating in the morning. It keeps you from doing a lot of physical labor. I mean, that wouldn't really be possible, but it also keeps you from getting lazy and drowsy. And it keeps you sharp, and it keeps you on your toes. Sometimes you get hungry, that can happen. It's an important part of the training to be aware of. We could expand this, of course. Be aware of our food, be aware of the things we use. What it really means is the things that are necessities of life. Food, clothes. Why do we wear the clothes we do? Why do we wear makeup? Why do we put makeup on? Why do we wear a hat or this or that? Why I'm buying this shirt or these pants? Why am I buying these ones? Is it because they're cheap, or because they're sturdy, or is it because they make me look good? Because I like them, because I like the color. Medicine. Are we using medicine when it's important to use it, or are we just using it all the time whenever we have a small pain, or whenever we have a small bout of this or that? And shelter. Why do we live where we live? Our bed. Why do we have a bed in the first place? I think there is something about if you're higher up, there's less dust. That might be useful. But why do we have such soft beds? Why can't we sleep on a simple bed? Sleep on the carpet. Meditators will sleep on a thin mat. I sleep on the carpet. I've done that for a long time. Helps you wake up in the morning. Very important. So those kinds of things. The basics of our life, once we've cleared away all the bad stuff, how are we living our lives? Our daily life, is it conducive to mindfulness and awareness, or is it conducive to laziness and addiction and clinging? Looking at the things that we use would be quite useful. So that's number 3. Number 4 is the schedule. Having a schedule, having a plan. So for an intensive meditator, the Buddha says, I've talked about this before, he gives a schedule. He says you sleep 4 hours. I'm boiling it down. He goes a little bit further. He describes it in more detail, but basically he says you sleep 4 hours. And the rest of the time is all just walking and sitting. And so a very simple schedule. It says in the morning, in the afternoon, in the evening, walking and sitting. Purifying your mind of obstructive states. purifying your mind of bad habits, really. Changing our thought process. The way we live our lives ordinarily, the course of a day. Where does your mind go over the course of a day, right? It's an interesting question that we probably never thought of in this way. If you were to enumerate the different mind states and the different emotions that went through, what does one day look like in the life of your mind? A lot of bad habits we find. Through the meditation we tend to find our bad habits, and so we purify them. We live our lives in this way, walking, sitting, and being mindful. And we purify it. Because we see, oh, this mind state that's coming up now that I'm mindful, I can see that it's unhelpful. It's a cause for stress for me. And you're mindful and you pay attention to it repeatedly, and you're able to change that just through seeing it, just through seeing that it causes you suffering. So that's the schedule, is walking and sitting. Another interesting thing about this is it points out walking, which is a question of many people who I've met. They'll ask, did the Buddha really teach walking, or why can't we just sit all the time? Well, the Buddha certainly did teach walking, and this passage is repeated in many different places, that we should walk and sit in alternation. Because sitting all the time is not healthy for the body, it's not natural. It's not the way of a human being. It's not a way of life. Walking and sitting is much more, walking some, sitting some. It's much more natural. And it's much better for you because it balances. Sitting can often make you tired or over-focused, over-concentrated. Whereas walking gives you energy, gives you strength. And when you do lie down to sleep, he says, this is ideally, I'm not going to suggest that everyone has to do this. He says, lie down on your side, put one leg on top of the other, and note in your mind when you're going to wake up. Say to yourself, okay, in 4 hours or at this time I'm going to wake up. Meaning that what you should be focused on when you go to sleep is when you're going to wake up. And there's a great power in that, because if you do that, and if you get good at it, you can find that you wake up quite close to when you're determined to wake up. It's quite impressive how the mind is able to time things like that. It keeps you from oversleeping. Good practice. And then he describes the practice in detail. So he says, be possessed of mindfulness and self-awareness. And he gives this comprehensive list of activities, meaning in all of our activities. And he says, when walking forward, walking back, when looking this way, turning your head and looking, when flexing and extending your arms, when carrying your robes and your bowl, or whatever you carry, when eating, when drinking, when tasting, when swallowing, when urinating and defecating. Something that doesn't get mentioned. I think I mention it quite often, or relatively often, but otherwise you don't hear it that often. Urinating and defecating, or to be mindful and self-aware. Meaning that mindful and self-aware in everything we do, even urinating and defecating. So this means when you bend, say bending, when you flex, flexing, when you reach, reaching, when you lift, lifting, when you brush your teeth, brushing, when you chew your food, chewing, when you swallow, swallowing. When you urinate, well, I'll leave it to you. Feeling, there's going to be a lot of feelings in this. So walking, standing, sitting, lying, falling asleep, waking up, talking and keeping silent, in everything you do, even in talking. When talking, you can be mindful of the movements of your lips. We think that when we're talking, our mind is preoccupied, but it's really not. The mind is involved there, but we're so good at it that we launch the words out of the mouth, and meanwhile our mind can be focused on our lips. It's interesting practice because you see how it's not really me talking, it's my body. It's the body, which is also not mine. So how many do we have now? We got a bunch of steps. I'm not going to count. We got the next step. The next step is having been one possessed of mindfulness. I mean, this is really the core of our practice, and particularly when you're not just meditating. But the core is to be mindful, meditating, not meditating, to be mindful. In whatever you do. Watching the stomach, that's being mindful. When you say rising, when you say falling, so on. But the next step, he says, is seclusion. Going to a secluded place. So for monks, go to the forest, a tree, root of a tree. Some big trees, you can just sit at the root. A mountain, a ravine, a cave, a charnel ground. Charnel ground is where they would just throw dead bodies. Good place to develop dispassion and to develop a sense of urgency, seeing all the dead people and realizing this body is going to be next. A jungle thicket, an open space, or a heap of straw, anywhere that's secluded. Your room, if you got a bedroom, take the bed out and make it a meditation room and sleep on the floor, then you've got a great space for meditation. You don't need a heap of straw. Carpet will do fine. I mean, this goes without saying that seclusion is very important because of the difficulty in being mindful among society, in an urban setting or a society of people, but also society of objects. Just being surrounded by such all of the sights and sounds and smells and so on. Go into seclusion because your mind's much clearer. Everything is much simpler, and so learning how the mind works is going to be much easier. But that's seclusion. After seclusion, there's keeping in mind that all the other steps are still in effect. You haven't stopped. One thing I should point that out is that you can't say, okay, I've kept moral precepts, now I'm going to do step 2 and forget about step 1. It's not like that. These are cumulative. So all the other steps, the keeping the precepts, the guarding the senses, the being mindful, moderation in eating, being mindful, all of that, these are all still in effect and become secluded. And as you're doing this, once you're secluded, then you can really focus your attention on the next step, which is overcoming the hindrances. Liking, disliking, drowsiness, distraction, doubt. Start working on the mind. Start looking at the negative habits, the things that cause us problems, keep us from finding peace, keep us from seeing clearly, keep us from being free from suffering. And the process of meditation will do this, but it's important also to address them directly. If you like something, say to yourself, liking. If you dislike something, disliking. If you're drowsy, say drowsy. You're distracted, thinking a lot, distracted. If you have doubt or uncertainty, doubting. All of these take away from the strength of mind. They take away from our presence. And so it's important to deal with them, to overcome them. Once you overcome them, you find that your mind settles down, and the Buddha says you enter into these things called jhanas, which can be interpreted in different ways, and certainly are by every different teacher who talks about them, but really it means stages of depth of practice. So we'll just say your mind becomes more clear, you become more mindful. You have, in the end, mindfulness due to equanimity, the Buddha says here. So that is really the pinnacle. When you get to the point when you have true mindfulness due to equanimity, means you've looked through everything, gone through it all, to the point where there's nothing, you see that there's nothing better than anything else. It's not an intellectual realization, it's really a visceral realization that you've just done so much observing through being mindful that you see nothing of any use besides being present, mindful. And so that's the highest state. And he says, this is my instruction, because when you get to that point, the next step is enlightenment. Right? Once you're equanimous and mindful and really observing everything just arising and ceasing as it is, that's when the mind becomes receptive to letting go. And the next step, of course, is enlightenment. So he says, this is where we get to. This is what I teach people. This is gradual training. And that's it. That's really the teaching of the sutta. But the ending of the sutta, Gaṇakamoggalla asks him, he says, so when you teach this way, when you give them this gradual practice, do they all become enlightened, or do some of them? Do they all attain nibbana, freedom from suffering, or do some not attain it? And the Buddha says, what do you think he says? He says, when they are thus advised and instructed by me, some attain nibbana, the ultimate goal, and some do not. And he says, well, the path, you say this path leads to nibbana. You're here guiding people to nibbana. Why is it that some of them don't make it? And the Buddha said, I mean, it's quite a not a very difficult question, I don't think, if you consider it carefully. He says, here we are in Savatthi, which is really in the north of India, center north, sort of. And suppose someone wanted to go to Rajagaha, which is a little further east. And someone came to you and said, hey, how do you get to Rajagaha? And you told him, well, this road goes to Rajagaha, follow it a while, you'll get to a village, go a little further, you'll see this town, go this way, you'll see Rajagaha. Finally you get to Rajagaha, with its lovely parks, groves, meadows, and ponds. Rajagaha is a lovely city, still is lovely. A little bit different in the time of the Buddha, though. And you told him all this, sent him on his way, and he went the wrong way. He went west instead. You gave him good directions, but he didn't listen to them. Went the wrong way. And then a second person came and you told them the same thing. And then they did follow the road and came to Rajagaha. Now, would you blame the guide, or would you wonder what is the reason? He said, no, there's no reason. What could I say about that? I'm just the guide. And the Buddha said, yes, same as for practice. Nibbana exists and the path to Nibbana exists, and I am present as the guide, yet some of them become enlightened and some of them do not. And then he says, Maggakayi tathagato. I am one who explains the path. Tathagata is the one who is just someone who explains, describes or details what is the path. This is important. You can't rely upon, it's a simple teaching, you can't rely upon the Buddha, you can't rely upon Buddhism to save you. You can't rely on your meditation even. You can't say, okay, here I am meditating, it's going to work. it's not just about meditating, it's about you now, your state of mind at every moment, what you are doing now, because that now is when we do work, and when we act. And so it is you who have to do the work. It's you who have to follow the path. And then Gaṇakamoggalla praises the Buddha and his disciples, and that's really the end of the sutta. So that's the Dhamma for tonight. Another description of the path, I think that's quite useful. Something to keep in mind. Some of these things should be familiar, but certainly always good to go over the things that are important. I mean, it gives you a clear picture, really, in a way, of what is Buddhism. If someone asks you, what is Buddhism? That fairly simple description there of the gradual practice is as good a description as any. It doesn't have everything in it, but it's very practical. So that's the Dhamma for tonight. Thank you all for tuning in. I wish you all the best.